Okay, we're going to talk Mexican history today, and we're going to start with the pre-independence period when Mexico had a number of different groups living there, and then after that, for a while, they were a Spanish colony, and then they declared their independence in 1810. The two great civilizations that were in Mexico before the Spanish got there were the Aztecs, who were there up until the 1500s, and the Mayas, who were there until about the 900s, and then they sort of died out. Nobody's really sure why. But those were the two great civilizations that were there, Aztec and Maya. And the Aztecs, sort of the center of Aztec culture or civilization, was a city called Tenochtitlan, which is now basically Mexico City. So the Aztecs are there for a long time. And in the 1500s, the Spanish come. But actually, before we get to the Spanish coming, the Spanish came in 1521, and they take over the Aztecs, and the conquistador who did that was named Cortez. And so basically, the Spanish are going to be in charge until the 1810s. They're going to own basically Mexico as a colony. Three traditions from that period, which had a big effect on Mexico, still affect Mexico today. One is that the tradition from that period, both under the Aztecs and the Spanish, was authoritarianism. There was no history of democracy there. When the British had colonies, the British tended to set up local legislatures and local governors who were local officials, and they let their colonies make some independent decisions. So by the time we broke away from the British in the 1700s, we in America and the colonies had a long tradition of democracy to fall back on. That's the kind of government that we were used to. The Spanish didn't run their colonies that way. They would bring over people from Spain to be the local leaders, to make the decisions, and when they left, they brought over other people from Spain. So the local people didn't really have any say in their own government. So Mexico, as we're going to see, has a long tradition of authoritarianism. Another tradition from this period that matters is Roman Catholicism. That's the religion that the Spanish brought over. They basically required the local people to convert to Roman Catholicism, and as we saw in the scavenger hunt, I think it was 82% of Mexicans today are Roman Catholic. Obviously, the Spanish language is a big tradition from this period, but also the idea of mestizos. And a mestizo is someone who is, as far as their heritage, part Spanish, part indigenous. And unlike the British, who basically did not intermarry with, have children with the Native Americans when they came here and formed a colony, the Spanish did. And so most Mexicans today are not indigenous or Spanish, they're a mix of both. And that's called a mestizo. So those all came from that period. Mexico declares independence from Spain in 1810. They have a war, and they win the war against Spain in 1821 and have their independence recognized at that time. So about 56 years after we do. The leader of this revolution, this war, is actually a Catholic priest named Father Miguel Hidalgo. He's sort of their George Washington. He leads the uprising against Spain. He leads them to victory. And so they get their independence in 1821. Over the next 60 years, it's more about 50 years. So the next 50 years or so, it's a highly unstable time. There are 89 different leadership changes over the next 50 years in Mexico, and which leads to 33 different leaders in 50 years. And so leadership changes 89 times, often passing back and forth between the same people who are, trying to take power from each other. So the next 50 years or so is a very unstable time in Mexico. There's no democracy. Basically, these leaders, regardless of what they're called, are dictators. I think there's actually 2 kings in there, 2 emperors very shortly. But it's kind of an unstable time where one person takes over, then another person, but they're not laying down the roots of democracy at all, and they don't have any stability as far as leadership for the next 50 years or so. In the middle of that next 50 years, from 1846 to 1848, there's the Mexican-American War, which lasts for 2 years. So I'm going to stop the video now and show you in class a short video about the Mexican-American War.